I've always liked hiking alone. I don't hate people or anything like that. I just like the quiet. I like the rhythm of walking for hours through trees, hearing nothing but wind and leaves and the occasional bird or snapping twig. It gives me space to think, and I feel more grounded out there than I ever do in town. That's why, when I had a few days off last fall, I packed up my gear and drove up to Vermont to hike part of the long trail on my own. It was late October, and the trees were just past peak. The ground was covered in red and orange leaves, and the air had that cold edge that lets you know winter isn't far off. I parked at a trailhead near a state forest and planned to hike out a loop over 2 days, just under 25 miles round trip. I brought my tent, cold weather gear, food, and everything else I needed. I'd done this kind of hike dozens of times. I had no reason to expect anything unusual. The first day was perfect. The trail was damp but not muddy. It wound up and down over low ridgelines, passing through quiet woods, old rock walls, and clearings that looked like they were once pastures a long time ago. I saw some deer around dusk, watched the clouds roll in behind them, and then made camp near a shallow stream about 12 miles in. I cooked dinner, cleaned up, and slept hard under a cold sky full of stars. The next morning, I was up early. I ate, packed up, and started moving. I had a long walk ahead and wanted to be back at my car by late afternoon. I followed the trail up another ridge, where the sun came through the thinning trees. It was bright, but the cold kept the bugs away. I passed a couple of old logging roads and a few trees with faded blue survey tape. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then, somewhere around mid-morning, I noticed something off the trail, something red. It was maybe 30 or 40 feet into the woods on the left side of the trail. Bright red against the gray trees and dead leaves. It stood out enough that I stopped walking. At first, I thought it was just a piece of trash, maybe a plastic bag or a balloon, but it looked like fabric, a shirt maybe. I took a few steps off the trail and squinted. It was a red flannel shirt, the kind you'd see at a thrift store or on someone cutting firewood. It was hanging on a low tree branch, sleeves dangling. I walked over to it slowly. It looked fairly new. No rips or stains, just hanging there like someone had taken it off and draped it over the branch. But there was no pack, no gear, no other signs of anyone nearby. That should have been enough to make me turn back. But I didn't, not right away. Instead, I looked around. The forest here was thick, but not hard to move through. Lots of old maple trees. The ground was soft underfoot, covered in leaves and moss. And about 20 feet past the shirt, something else caught my eye: stone. Not rocks or boulders, but upright slabs. 1, then 2, then 3. Headstones. I stopped walking. My first thought was that I had stumbled onto an old family cemetery. That happens sometimes in the Northeast. Families used to bury their dead on their land generations ago, and the stones get forgotten, swallowed up by the forest. I've seen a few of those. Usually the stones are old, cracked, faded with moss. These weren't. I stepped closer. The first headstone was small, white, and clean. It looked almost new. No growth on it. The engraving was sharp. I brushed a few leaves away from the base with my boot and read the name. A woman, born in 1938, died in 1992. Nothing unusual except how fresh it looked. The next one was older, 1910 to 1949. A man, also clean, no cracks. I looked at the third, another woman, 1960 to 1984. Then I noticed the ground nearby. To the left of the stones were 2 long patches of disturbed earth, each one maybe 6 feet long and a couple of feet wide. The dirt was loose. Leaves had started to settle over them, but the ground hadn't fully sunk or hardened yet. These were fresh graves. Someone had dug them recently. That's when something clicked in my head. Not curiosity anymore, but something colder. These weren't just old family headstones left behind in the woods. Someone had placed these here deliberately. They were moved, and the graves, whoever dug them, had done it recently. Maybe within days, maybe even that morning. I didn't see any tools. No shovel, no tarp, no sign of a vehicle. But I didn't like being there anymore. My back started to feel exposed. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting someone to step out from behind a tree. I turned and started walking back to the trail quickly, but not running. I didn't want to make noise. When I got back to the red shirt, I looked at it again, really looked this time. It wasn't just hanging there by chance. It had been tied at the sleeves, like someone meant for it to stay there, like a marker. Once I was back on the trail, I picked up my pace. My plan had been to follow the loop around and come out near where I started, but I didn't want to be in the woods any longer than I had to be. I checked my map and found a side trail that cut down toward a dirt road. It would add a few miles, but get me out of there faster. I followed it. The rest of the hike passed in a blur. I kept thinking I heard something, twigs snapping behind me, or something moving just out of sight, but I never saw anyone. My heart wouldn't slow down until I reached the road. When I got back to my car, I didn't even take off my pack. I just got in and drove. I made the report the next day. I went to the local police station. I told them exactly what I'd seen. Headstones, 2 fresh graves, a red shirt tied to a tree like a marker. I gave them GPS coordinates from my hiking tracker. The officer listened and took notes. He didn't seem surprised, which made it feel worse somehow. He told me someone would check it out. A week later, I got a call. The same officer told me they'd gone out and found everything I described. The shirt, the graves, the stones. And then he told me something I still think about all the time. The headstones had been stolen. Someone had broken into a local graveyard about 15 miles from the trail and taken several old headstones. The names matched. They had no reason to think the bodies were disturbed, but they weren't completely sure. No tools had been left behind. No tire tracks. No fingerprints. Just a bizarre case of stolen headstones being placed in a remote part of the woods. They never found out who did it. No arrests. No more evidence turned up. But the part that stays with me more than anything is the way the shirt was tied to that tree. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, like a flag, or a message, or maybe a lure. Since then, I've kept hiking. I still go out into the woods alone, but I look at things differently now. When I see something that feels off, I don't go check it out. I don't follow red shirts into the trees. I keep walking. I keep my distance, because you never really know what you'll find out there. And sometimes it's not what you find, it's what you weren't supposed to. I've spent a good part of my adult life out in the backcountry, mostly the western states, Montana, Wyoming, Washington, Oregon. I don't do it for the adrenaline or bragging rights. I do it because it strips everything down to the basics. Walk, eat, sleep, survive. There's something clean about that. Keeps my head clear in a world that's too loud most of the time. After years of backpacking, you think you've seen everything. Rainstorms that flood your tent. Steep switchbacks that turn your knees into jelly. Trails that vanish halfway through. I've run into moose, elk, even a cougar once, but it ran off before I had time to panic. I've had close calls with lightning and nearly fell into a crevasse on a snowfield one summer. But none of that ever stuck with me like this one night deep in the Idaho wilderness, where the only thing that mattered to a full-grown bear was a tiny tube of toothpaste. The trip was supposed to be straightforward. 4 of us were doing an 8-day loop through the Sawtooths. We'd done parts of the trail before, but never the full loop, and we figured it was time. It was early fall, crisp and cool, but not yet snowing. We were all experienced hikers, no rookies among us. Everyone packed their own food, gear, bear spray, and kept to the usual protocols. We'd bear bag our food every night, stringing it up in a tree well away from camp. No cooking near tents. No scented stuff left in backpacks, or so we thought. The first 3 days went smooth. Long miles, some tough climbs, but nothing unexpected. Clear skies, cold nights. The kind of trip that makes your muscles ache in the right way. Each evening we set up camp near water, cooked, cleaned up, and got the food up in the trees. We'd pass around a flask some nights, laugh about old stories, and then crash hard before it even got dark. No phones, no signal, just wind and trees and sky. On the 4th day, we hit a more remote stretch of the trail, a part that cut through thick woods with no views and little sunlight. It was one of those dense areas where the trees press in close and the forest floor is soft and quiet. The air was damp, full of pine and moss. We saw bear scat near a stream crossing and fresh prints in the mud. That wasn't unusual in itself. We were in bear country after all. But they looked fresh, big, deep. We all knew the rules. We'd reviewed them even. Keep all food and scented stuff in the bear bag. Don't cook or eat near your tent. Don't sleep with anything that smells like food. It wasn't our first time. That night, we set up camp in a flat clearing tucked between thick stands of spruce. There was a small creek maybe 100 yards off. Enough room to cook and hang the food safely. We each picked our tent spots, set up, then cooked dinner and did the usual cleanup. When the food was packed and hanging high from a tree branch, we all wandered off to our tents. That night, everything felt normal until it wasn't. It started with a sound. I was asleep, but something pulled me out of it. A kind of shuffle in the dark. At first, I thought it was wind or one of the guys getting up to pee. Then I heard a low huff. Not a full growl, just that short burst of breath animals make when they're investigating something. I froze. Then I heard it again. Heavier steps now. Slow, deliberate. Something big. I sat up in my sleeping bag and pressed my hand against the tent wall, feeling the cold from outside. My breath was stuck in my throat. I heard another sound. A scrape, like claws on nylon, came from one of the other tents. Then I heard the sound of a zipper being torn or pawed at. A deep snuffling followed. Something sniffing, pressing against a tent. Then chaos. I heard movement. Someone in their tent scrambling, gear shifting, canvas tearing. The tent wall collapsed. A yell muffled and cut short by fear. Then came the unmistakable sound of something heavy moving fast. Brush snapping. A loud crash as someone ran into a log or tripped. More movement. Something large circled the camp. I didn't move. I sat stone still, heart racing. I had bear spray next to me, but unzipping the tent would make noise. I didn't want to draw attention. I waited, frozen. Minutes passed. Felt like hours. Then, from maybe 10 feet away, I heard it again. That deep, rumbling breath, followed by a long sniff. It was outside my tent. I stayed still, not daring to move. I could hear it breathing. The fabric of my tent shifted slightly, like it had been nudged. I heard it walk off slowly, padding around, circling again. Then silence. I lay there for what felt like eternity. I wasn't even cold anymore. I was soaked in sweat. Eventually, as the early light filtered in, I unzipped my tent and crawled out. The scene was a mess. One of the tents had been collapsed, partially shredded down one side. Its contents scattered, sleeping bag half pulled out. A few items were clawed or bitten. A trekking pole was snapped in half. The ground was churned up, footprints everywhere, huge prints wide and deep. A bear had definitely been in our camp. The guy whose tent had been torn was sitting on a rock, white as a sheet, clutching his sleeping bag. He was physically fine. Some scratches and bruises, but he looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. He hadn't seen it fully, just the massive shadow, the claws, the weight of it pressing down on his tent wall before he bolted. That's when we pieced it together. As we gathered and sorted gear, one of us found a small travel-sized toothpaste tube lying near the collapsed tent. The cap was off, tooth marks through the soft plastic. It had been inside a pack which had been inside the tent. The pack belonged to the guy who got his tent torn open. He'd forgotten about it. He used the toothpaste before bed, zipped it into the side pocket of his backpack, and meant to put it in the bear bag later. But after a long day, with the cold setting in and muscles sore from hiking, he'd crawled into his sleeping bag and passed out. It was a simple mistake, easy to make. One tiny tube of toothpaste. That's what brought the bear. The food was up in the trees, untouched. It didn't matter. The bear found the scent closer, easier, and followed it right into our tents. It didn't want people. It wanted mint-flavored sugar in a soft tube. The guy wasn't in any real danger, not technically. The bear wasn't there to hurt him. But try telling that to someone who woke up with a 400-pound predator pressing against their tent wall, sniffing at their head. In that moment, fear doesn't care about intentions. It just takes over. We packed up that morning in silence. No breakfast, no coffee. just packed and moved out. We hiked 10 miles that day, more than we planned, until we reached a safer spot. No one complained. We just wanted out of that part of the woods. The rest of the trip was quiet. No more bear signs, no more close calls. But something had shifted in all of us. We were more careful. We double-checked every item before nightfall. We hung anything that even might carry a scent. Gum, sunscreen, chapstick, trash. It all went up. When we got back to the trailhead, there was relief but also reflection. It had been a clean trip in terms of weather, terrain, and injury. But none of us forgot that night. It drilled into us how razor-thin the line is between safety and disaster out there. All it takes is one slip, one moment of laziness, one forgotten item. That guy never came on another trip. He didn't say he wouldn't, but we could tell. Something had been taken from him out there, his confidence, maybe, the comfort of knowing where the edges were. After years of backpacking, I had never experienced anything like that either, and I still haven't since. But I've never forgotten. Now, I treat toothpaste like it's made of gold. It never enters my tent. I pack it like food. I hang it like food. I respect the rules more than I ever did before. Not because I'm paranoid, but because I've seen what happens when you don't. That bear didn't want blood. It didn't want conflict. It just wanted something sweet. But to get it, it tore into a person's shelter like it was nothing. No warning, no time to react. And if it had gone a little differently, if the guy had panicked and kicked or screamed, or if the bear had been startled, it could have ended badly. That's what sticks with me. Not the bear, not the ruined tent, not even the fear. What stays with me is how small the mistake was. Just a forgotten tube of toothpaste. And that was all it took. I don't usually hike alone, but sometimes I crave the quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get sitting in your living room with the TV off, but the kind of quiet where you hear nothing except wind and birds and your own boots on the ground. This happened back in late October, when the days were still warm but the nights got cold fast. I took a week off work and drove out to the northern edge of the state forest. There's a stretch of trail up there not a lot of people use. Too remote, too little cell service, and nothing scenic enough to post on social media. Perfect for me. I had packed light. Just a tent, sleeping bag, food, a small stove, a map, compass, a backup GPS, and enough water to get started. The trail looped around the ridgeline for about 20 miles, but I planned to make my own loop by bushwhacking for a few miles off-trail on the second day and cutting across a shallow valley. I'd marked some points on a topo map where I thought it might be interesting to camp. Places where there were old stone walls and clearings, remnants of settlements from over 100 years ago. I like finding that kind of thing. You can learn a lot about the past by looking at what people left behind in the middle of nowhere. The first day was uneventful. I hiked about 9 miles in, made camp near an old hunting shelter, and slept with no problems. There were some deer around, maybe a fox based on the tracks I saw in the morning. Normal stuff, but the second day is where things started to get weird. Around late morning, after I'd gone about 3 miles off the marked trail, I stumbled across something strange. I was walking along a shallow ridgeline, weaving between trees, when I saw what looked like a stone marker poking out of the ground maybe 30 yards ahead. At first, I thought it might just be a rock, but as I got closer, I realized it was a headstone. Just one. A weathered, gray slab of granite, about 3 feet high, standing alone in the woods, surrounded by nothing. No fence, no other stones, no signs of a graveyard or settlement. Just this one headstone sitting out there, a little tilted but upright. The name had been worn down by time, but I could still make out parts of it. Sarah W., born 1839, died 1864. That was all I could read. The bottom was moss-covered, and the rest of the lettering had been erased by over 150 years of rain and snow. It struck me as incredibly strange. Why would a headstone be out here in the middle of the woods, miles from the nearest road or path? I walked around it, looking for signs of a grave, disturbed earth, a sunken patch of ground, maybe some stones laid out in a rectangle, but there was nothing. The forest floor was solid, covered in pine needles, leaves, roots. The headstone looked like it had just been placed there recently. No growth around the base, no lichen on the backside, and it wasn't leaning like most really old markers. Someone had cleared the area around it. What really got me, though, was the scrape marks. At the base of the stone, I saw long, parallel gouges in the dirt and roots, like someone had dragged it across the ground. You could even see a trail leading away from it, barely noticeable unless you were looking closely. The leaves had been disturbed, like they'd been brushed aside recently. That was when the thought hit me, someone moved this. That made no sense. Why would someone go through the trouble of hauling a 100-pound headstone out into the woods? This was a remote spot. You'd have to drag it for miles to get it here. And for what? It's not like you can sell a headstone, especially not an old, broken one with a half-erased name. I took a photo of it, marked it on my GPS, and kept going. It bothered me, though. I kept thinking about it as I made my way down into the shallow valley. I didn't feel like I was being watched or anything. It wasn't creepy in that way. It was just unsettling in a logical way, like when something's obviously out of place and your brain can't explain it. That night, I camped by a dry creek bed about 2 miles east of the headstone. The air had that early frost smell, and everything was silent. I thought I might see more animals, but the woods were dead quiet after sunset. I cooked some rice and beef jerky, crawled into my tent, and tried to forget about the headstone. I figured maybe it had just been part of an old homestead nearby and got moved during logging years ago. But the next morning, something was off. When I unzipped my tent, I noticed the rocks I'd placed in a circle around my fire pit had been moved. Not all of them, but enough. 2 of the larger ones had been rolled out of place, and the pile of kindling I'd stacked neatly was gone. Just gone. I looked around for signs of animals, but there weren't any fresh tracks. No claw marks. Nothing. I thought maybe it had been the wind, but these were 10-pound rocks. Not easy to move, and the fire pit was sheltered by a ridge. I walked a few yards out and checked the perimeter. That's when I saw another path. Another barely there drag trail, leading out of the clearing and into the woods. I followed it for about 50 feet, then it disappeared. The leaves were too thick, and the forest was too dense. But something had been moved. Something heavy. I felt a knot in my stomach. I didn't know why. I just suddenly wanted to get out of there. I packed up and decided to head back toward the marked trail early, skipping the rest of my off-trail loop. But I got turned around. It's embarrassing to admit, but even experienced hikers get disoriented. I was sure I was heading north, but the terrain started sloping the wrong way. The creek I crossed didn't match my map, and after 3 hours of walking, I found myself right back near that headstone. Only now it wasn't alone. There was another one, a second stone maybe 10 feet to the left of the first. This one was newer, not brand new, but clearly made within the last few decades. The granite was lighter, the edges sharp. It had a different name, Edward S.H., 1942 to 1997. Again, just one name, no epitaph, no grave, no cemetery. And this stone also had drag marks, deep ones, cutting through the forest floor. Someone had dragged it out here recently, very recently. The dirt around the base was fresh, like it had been placed there that morning. I backed away. I don't know why I was so unsettled, but I was. Something about seeing a second stone confirmed that this wasn't random. Someone was collecting headstones and dragging them to this spot in the middle of nowhere. Not for a prank. Not for art, for something else. I didn't want to sleep in the forest again. Not near there. I made a rough bearing southwest and kept moving. My legs were sore, my shoulders ached, but I kept walking until I reached a marked trail by late afternoon. From there, I followed the blazes down to the parking area where I'd left my car. There were no other vehicles. I drove home in silence. Later that week, I started looking up old cemetery records. I couldn't find anything for a Sarah W. from that area, but I did find an obituary for an Edward Shore, died 1997, buried in a churchyard about 50 miles south of the forest. I drove there the next Saturday. His headstone was missing, just a patch of grass where it had been. The plot was still there, and there was a small temporary marker staked in the ground. One of those plastic ones funeral homes use before the real stone is installed. I asked the groundskeeper about it. He told me someone had stolen the headstone last month. Just showed up one morning, gone. Never seen anything like it, he said. Takes a hell of a lot of effort to steal one of those. I thanked him and left, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Now I knew for sure. Someone was stealing headstones and moving them to that spot in the woods. But why? It didn't make any sense. I went back out there once more, not to camp, just to see. I hiked in during the day, this time staying on the marked trail and cutting off near the GPS point I'd saved. Took about 3 hours to get there, and when I arrived, there were now 4 stones, all spaced evenly in a row facing the same direction. The 2 I'd seen before were there, and 2 more had been added. One was almost completely blank, just a few carved letters, looked like it hadn't been finished. The 4th was new, clean, still had bits of packing foam stuck to the base, like it had just been unwrapped. No name, just the words, beloved husband. It hadn't been dragged like the others. It had been carried. I could see the scuff marks from boots leading in and out of the clearing. 2 sets of prints, big ones. Someone was building something out here, something quiet, something no one else was supposed to find. I turned and walked back to my car. I haven't been back since, but sometimes I still think about it, about how much effort it takes to move a headstone. You can't do it alone easily. You need straps, a dolly, probably a truck. It's not something you do for fun. It's not random, and it's not harmless. Someone had a reason, and whatever that reason was, they're still out there, dragging stones through the woods and placing them in a line, silent, hidden, and watched only by the trees. I didn't grow up hiking, but after college, a few friends pulled me into it. It started with simple day hikes and then weekend trips. Nothing extreme at first, just enough to get out of town and feel like we were doing something real with our time. Over the years, we got more confident. The gear got better, packs got lighter. We thought we were experienced, and maybe we were, but not enough to see how one tiny mistake could ruin everything. It was late September when we went out on the trip that changed how I look at the woods forever. There were 15 of us in total. Not all close friends, more like a big group of loosely connected people who all shared an interest in hiking. Some I knew well, others I had only met once or twice. The plan was to do a 4-day loop through a forested range in the northwest. It wasn't a super popular trail, one of those semi-maintained places where the trees crowd in close and you don't see another person for days. That was the draw. Get away from everything. We arrived late in the morning, parked our cars, checked the maps, and set out. Felt good to be moving. The weather was perfect, cool enough to keep from sweating too much, but not so cold you needed more than a light jacket. The leaves had just started to turn, and the trail was soft underfoot from old needles and moss. We hiked about 10 miles the first day, nothing too ambitious since we had a lot of time. We made camp near a narrow stream with enough room to fit all our tents without crowding. That night was normal. We sat around a fire, cooked our food, passed around snacks, and then crawled into our tents when the cold started to bite. I slept fine. Nothing strange, nothing that made me think this trip would be different from any of the others. The second day was longer. We did maybe 12 miles, climbing a bit higher into denser forest. The trail narrowed and twisted more, and we had to help each other over some fallen trees. We were still in good spirits, though. A few of us saw elk off in the trees, and someone thought they heard a wolf at one point, though it was probably just wind pushing through the canyons. We made camp on a ridge that night. The view was incredible, trees stretching forever, fading into blue as the sun set. I remember thinking I wanted to take a picture, but never did. I was tired. We all were. Dinner was quick that night. Most of us brought dehydrated meals. I had one of those pouches where you just add boiling water and wait 10 minutes. Someone else had granola and dried fruit. Another guy peeled a banana. I remember that because I watched him eat it like it was a luxury. Fresh fruit that deep in wasn't common. I didn't think anything of it at the time. None of us did. He peeled it, ate it, laughed about how good it tasted, and then, trying to be responsible, zipped the peel into the inside pocket of his jacket. He said he'd throw it out when we got back to civilization. It was a good instinct. None of us wanted to be the kind of people who littered in the woods. But after a long day, and after a meal and a small fire and the quiet that comes with miles of trail behind you, he forgot. We all forgot. The third day started normal. We packed up early and hiked down into a valley with a small lake. The trail got harder, rockier, and wetter, and we had to cross a few streams by stepping on slick stones. I twisted my ankle at one point but kept going. It wasn't bad, just sore. We reached our next camp area by late afternoon, right on the edge of a larger lake that reflected the trees like glass. That was our last night before the loop turned back toward the cars. Spirits were still high. The banana peel never came up again. I don't think he remembered it was in his pocket. I know I didn't. And even if someone had brought it up, I doubt we would have worried. A banana peel inside a zipped pocket, inside a jacket, inside a tent? Who would think that could cause a problem? That night was cold. The lake pulled all the heat out of the air, and there was no wind to mix it up. We all bundled tight and crawled into our sleeping bags early. The fire had burned low. A few people were still up, talking in hushed tones. I lay in my tent, curled in my bag, listening to the water lap against the shore. Then I heard something strange. It started with footsteps, not human ones. Heavy, slow, crunching dry twigs and dead leaves. I froze. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or maybe an elk. Big animals pass through camps sometimes. If you stay quiet, they just move on. But then I heard someone gasp from one of the nearby tents. A zipper tore open fast. Not mine, someone else's. More gasps, then shouts. No words, just sounds, pure panic. More zippers, people yelling. Tent collapsed. Something heavy crashed through the brush. Then I heard the growl. Deep, low, and very close. I could hear it from inside my tent, through my sleeping bag. That kind of sound doesn't leave your body. It stays in your chest. You feel it before your brain processes it. I knew it was a bear before I even moved. I didn't get out. I didn't make a sound. I stayed absolutely still, hoping it would pass me by. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid it would give me away. I lay there and tried to breathe through my nose, slow and quiet. Every muscle in my body was tight. The bear moved through camp like it owned the place. I heard it sniffing tents. It bumped something metal, maybe a pot left out. People were trying to stay quiet, but you could hear them. The tension, the fear. One guy whispered something and someone else hissed at him to shut up. Footsteps again, then another growl even closer. I heard the bear paw at a tent and then rip it open. The fabric tore like paper. A yell, then a scramble of movement. I don't know who it was. Someone ran. I heard the pounding of feet. The bear roared. More shouting, more chaos. People running. Someone tripped. A scream. Then it all went quiet. I don't know how long I stayed frozen. Maybe an hour. Maybe more. I listened for every sound. Heart hammering in my chest. The bear came back once. I'm sure of it. I heard it sniff near my tent. Heard it exhale. Loud and wet. I didn't move. Not a twitch. I think it left because it didn't smell food, or maybe it did, but didn't care enough to rip into my tent. Eventually, the forest quieted. No wind, no water, no footsteps, just silence. At first light, I finally unzipped my tent and crawled out. My legs were stiff. My back hurt. My mouth was dry. I looked around and saw the destruction. One tent was shredded, ripped completely in half. Clothes were scattered. Someone's backpack had been torn open. There were deep paw prints in the dirt, bigger than my open hand. Claw marks in the trees. A cooking pot was dented and bent. The guy with the banana peel was sitting on a rock, pale and shaking. His jacket lay in a heap beside him. The inside pocket was shredded. That's when it all clicked. The peel. It had been in there the whole time. He must have worn the jacket into his sleeping bag. The smell brought the bear. The person who screamed and ran was fine, somehow. Scraped up, bruised, but alive. They'd taken off into the woods and climbed a tree. Spent the rest of the night up there. A few others had run too, huddled together in the dark, waiting for the bear to leave. We gathered what we could and left that morning. No one spoke much. We were all shaken, humbled. We thought we knew the rules, how to hike smart, camp smart, stay safe. But all it took was one forgotten peel to put all of us in danger. I think about that trip a lot now. Not just the fear, but the fragility of it all. How something as simple as a banana peel, something so small, could bring a predator into camp. We were lucky. None of us died. But it could have gone so much worse. Now, when I pack for hikes, I triple-check every pocket. I carry out every scrap. I don't trust scent-proof bags or distance or time. If something smells, it doesn't come into the tent. I don't care if it's fruit, candy, toothpaste, or wrappers. It all stays far away. And when people ask me why I'm so careful, I tell them this story. I don't exaggerate it. I don't have to. The truth is scary enough. I still hike, still camp, but I'm different now. And when the woods go quiet at night, I don't hear peace anymore. I hear what's waiting in the dark, smelling the air, searching for something it can't name, but knows is close. And all it takes is one mistake, just one. We had been planning the trip for months. There were 5 of us. Me, Greg, Matt, Leo, and James. We were all from Northern California, had grown up doing short weekend hikes, car camping, and little overnighters in the hills near the coast. But this was different. This was our first real backpacking trip. 5 days out in the Sierra Mountains. No cell service, no people, just us, some heavy packs, and everything we needed to stay alive strapped to our backs. The trail we picked wasn't well traveled. That was the point. We wanted real wilderness. We wanted to feel like we were truly out there. We picked a trail that started off a Forest Service road about 4 hours out of Bishop. We hiked in early on a Tuesday morning, trying to get as far from civilization as we could. The trailhead was quiet when we arrived, the air dry and cool, the smell of pine and dust everywhere. We moved steady that first day. I remember the weight of the pack biting into my shoulders around mile 6. We took breaks often, filtered water from a creek, ate trail mix and beef jerky, and kept walking until late afternoon. The terrain was steep in parts, rocky and narrow in others. We passed through groves of pine and fir, climbed out onto open granite, and moved deeper into the backcountry. Our goal was to make camp near a small lake we had marked on the map. Took most of the day to get there. By the time we arrived, our shirts were soaked, our legs aching. The lake was tucked into a bowl of granite, still and black under the late afternoon sun. There were no other tents around. We had it all to ourselves. We set up our tents along the tree line, just off the granite. We cooked dinner with our little camp stoves, and as the sun dropped behind the ridge, we went over the rules again. Hang all scented stuff in the bear bag. That meant food, trash, sunscreen, deodorant, even toothpaste. We had a long rope for it. We picked a tree with a high branch away from camp, tied one end of the rope to a rock, tossed it over, and hoisted the dry bag up when it was full. The first night was quiet, cold too. I remember waking up at one point and pulling my sleeping bag tighter around me. The stars above the tent through the mesh were bright, too bright to sleep easily. The next day, we hiked out further on a day loop, just carrying water and snacks. The lake was a good base camp, and we planned to return there for a second night. We scrambled up a ridge and looked out across valleys and peaks that felt like they had never seen people before. We didn't talk much that day, just moved and took it in. We got back to camp around 5, tired and hungry. We cooked dehydrated chili and soup, ate it sitting on rocks, and watched the sky turn gold, then purple, then black. The bag went back up in the tree. Greg was supposed to check that we all put our stuff in. We trusted each other to be careful. We knew the rules. Bears in the Sierra weren't usually aggressive, but they were curious, smart, and big. That night, I fell asleep fast. My legs were sore, and the cold wasn't as sharp as the night before. The wind made soft noises in the trees. I remember thinking how quiet it was, how far away we were from everything. I drifted off. Then something woke me. It was sudden, sharp, a noise, yelling. Took me a second to place it, to understand what was happening. I was half asleep, heart already pounding from the shock of waking like that. I could hear someone screaming, muffled, panicked. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart hammering in my chest. I unzipped the tent. Cold air rushed in. I saw Matt out of his tent, crouched low, looking toward the trees. Greg and Leo came out a second later. I stood barefoot in the dirt, confused, still trying to understand what was happening. Then I heard the sound, a tearing sound. Plastic, fabric, something heavy shifting. The noise came from James' tent. I grabbed my headlamp and turned it on, the beam cutting through the dark. The tent was moving. No, something was inside it. Big. The nylon bulged and rippled like a balloon being twisted. James' voice came again, shouting, then turning into something closer to screaming. We ran. The four of us moved as one, barefoot or in socks, grabbing whatever we could. I had a metal cup in my hand. Leo had a pot. Greg had a rock the size of a melon. Matt was already yelling, trying to scare whatever it was away. When we got closer, I saw it. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a question anymore. A bear. A massive black bear. Probably 250 pounds, maybe more. Thick shoulders. Shiny black fur. The back half of it was sticking out of James' tent, its head and front legs fully inside. The tent was crumpled around it. The stakes ripped out of the ground, poles bent like spaghetti. James was still in there. We started yelling, loud, banging metal together, throwing small rocks at the bear's back. I hit it with my cup. It didn't care, kept pawing and nosing around inside the tent. I could hear James moaning, then a wordless scream, high and broken. I picked up a bigger rock and chucked it hard. It hit the bear in the back leg. That got a reaction. It growled, a deep, low sound that made me freeze. Then it backed out of the tent slowly, turning to look at us. His face was smeared with something. I saw a tube of toothpaste in the dirt, flattened and half-chewed. The smell of mint was strong in the air. James had left his toothpaste in the tent. The bear stared at us, unafraid. It wasn't leaving. We threw more rocks, yelled louder, hit pots and cups together like cymbals. The bear moved a few steps away, then stopped. It looked back at the tent, then at us again. Then, finally, it turned and loped off into the dark, crashing through brush and trees. We waited, frozen in place, listening. Our ears strained for sounds. Nothing. Silence. Just our own breathing and the wind. We ran to James' tent. It was destroyed, torn open, the fabric shredded. One pole snapped in half. James was curled up in a ball, pressed against the far wall, pale and shaking. He wasn't bleeding. Not really. Some scratches. His sleeping bag was ripped. The toothpaste tube was mashed into his sleeping pad. He'd forgotten to put it in the bear bag. He didn't say anything. None of us did. We helped him out, pulled him to his feet, got him into Matt's tent. No one slept that night. We kept the fire going until morning, something we usually didn't do. We took turns keeping watch. Every sound in the woods made our stomachs turn. Every creak of the trees, every snap of a twig. My eyes kept going back to the shredded tent, flapping slightly in the wind. By dawn, we were packed. We didn't even eat breakfast, just filled water bottles and got moving. We hiked out fast, barely stopping. No one talked. We all just walked, watching the trees, looking for movement. I kept checking over my shoulder, sure the bear was still following us. Took us the whole day to get back to the car. When we finally saw it, parked under the trees like something from another world, I felt like I could breathe again. We loaded our gear silently, got in and drove. It wasn't until the next day, back at home, that James told us what happened. He had been asleep when the bear arrived. It ripped through the side of his tent like paper. He woke up with it already halfway inside. Its face was inches from his. He didn't move, didn't scream at first. He thought it might kill him if he made a sound. It was pawing through his stuff, and then it found the toothpaste. That's when he yelled. That's when we all woke up. He said he could smell its breath, hot and rank, full of rot. He said its eyes didn't even see him. It only cared about the smell. After that, we were done with backcountry hiking for a while. Maybe forever. We talked about going back out again. Maybe in a few years. But it was different now. The idea of nature wasn't peaceful anymore. It wasn't quiet lakes and blue skies. It was teeth, claws, weight pressing down on your chest in the dark. James never camped again. He said he was done, and we believed him. He had nightmares for months. We all got careless. Just a little, and it could have ended way worse. A tube of mint paste. That's all it took. Now, every time I go camping, even in a campground, I triple check. Food, sunscreen, trash, wrappers, toothpaste. Everything goes in the bear bag. Everything. Because out there, in the real wild, they don't care about your tent. They don't care about your rules. They smell what they want and they come take it. And if you're in the way, they'll go through you to get it.